Hello, everybody, and welcome to the SDHQ Podcast first episode. My name is Noah Kupetsky. I run Steam Deck HQ, and I'm here with our other host, who would introduce himself right now.
Sure. I am Kyle, or CryoBite33. I run a YouTube channel of the same name.
Great introduction. So, this is the first episode of our podcast, and before we get into the topics for today, I do want to go over what this podcast is going to be about, what we're going to be talking about in general for the entirety of this podcast and all of our episodes, what our focuses will be, and just kind of give a little bit of what you can expect moving forward. So there are a lot of podcasts that talk about games, and there's a lot that talk about hardware and handheld PCs. One of my favorites is Nerd Nest, and they go more into the specifics of the actual hardware. With the SDHQ podcast, we're going to be focusing more on the Steam Deck and any updates that relate to the Steam Deck and games as a whole, since Steam Deck HQ's focus is on games more than it is on the actual handheld hardware itself, like other handhelds like Ioneos, GPDs, the Legion Go, ROG Ally, those. So when you come and listen to the SDHQ podcast, you can look forward to getting any updates on what's going on with the Steam Deck, what's going on with games in relation to the Steam Deck, like if there's any updates for games that have improved Steam Deck patches, things like that, and just some information about games as a whole, since we at Steam Deck HQ have the luxury of reviewing games that are coming out. So we have a lot of insight into that, and we talk to developers and all that fun stuff. So that's essentially what you can expect moving forward from this podcast. And if you're looking for a one-stop shop for just Steam Deck information, this is where you're going to want to be.
Well said.
Thank you. I really once I start talking, the nervousness starts to die out, and I start to gain my confidence back. I feel it's like rising. Either way,
All right.
let's go ahead and start off. We talked about games that get like Steam Deck patches, so why don't we talk about some Steam Deck, some games that were updated with some patches that helped Steam Deck performance, and just playability in general from this week. So we actually had a solid amount of games that did get patches that have improved Steam Deck playability. One of my favorites actually that got updated was did you ever play GTA Chinatown Wars?
That was
Like
the PSP one, right?
it was on PSP, yeah.
Yeah, I did way back in the day. Yeah.
So there's this game called Maniac, which actually just got a patch that improved its gamepad glyphs on the Steam Deck and some font scaling to make it easier to read. And it got Steam Deck verified from it. So that's really cool. It's a really great game. I played the demo for it through the Next Fest, and I really liked it. And it's extreme. It's weird. Like you can play as Santa Claus or like a guy dressing up as Santa Claus too. I've heard
Are those two
it's a good
different
time.
characters, or is that the same
Yeah, so
character?
they have I think they have like six playable characters, and the Santa guy is just one of them,
Oh,
which
okay.
obviously the best one.
Obviously.
Obviously, yeah. Um, on top of that, Forgive Me Father 2, which is the follow up to the Lovecraftian first person shooter, got the verified badge finally. They added gamepad support a while back, but they were still playable for a bit. So I think they finally went back to verification, and they got the green check mark. So good for them. It's a really fun game as well, and I feel like there's a lack of first person shooters that really run well on the Steam Deck, and Forgive Me Father 2 is one that does. So that's really cool. The Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons remake got some larger text and fixed some LOD issues and gamepad improvements for like their options screen. So it's a bit better on the Steam Deck now. Um, there's this game. I actually just discovered this game today. Mars First Logistics. If the way I guess I would describe it is like Besiege, but there's more of a story to it because you're building a Mars rover to transport cargo to build up, a colony on Mars.
Interesting. Okay.
It's really cool. It's also got like a was it a Sable. You know the game Sable?
No, I do not.
Okay, so Sable has very like comic book esque graphics, and Mars First Logistics has a similar style to it, which I thought was really cool.
Oh yeah, I see that. It's kind of
So
like Ali Ali World. Like it's got the
yeah,
yeah.
yes, yeah. So I thought that was kind of cool. It's like Besiege, but on Mars with like Ollie Ollie World and like Sable, graphical style to it.
I like
And
it.
I'm a sucker for physics based games. Like
Oh yeah, for sure.
I love it. I love it. So I discovered that one today, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to purchase it after we record because I
I'm
wrote about it, but that
I'm
just
definitely wishlisting it. This looks right up my alley. Yeah.
yeah, right. Dead Island 2 actually just got released on Steam as well, and it got the playable badge. And it didn't get really any Steam Deck update, but they did. PlayOn posted a developer note that like talked about the Steam Deck playability a bit and some of the issues that they already have. Like I think there's an issue that when you first launch it, it'll hang on a black screen, so you just have to force close and reopen it. And they did note that they can't change the text scaling at all, so there is going to be some small text, but otherwise it's very playable. I thought that while there wasn't like an update, I thought it was very nice of them to take that step to just leave some notes,
Yeah.
So that and I have the game. I haven't started playing it yet, but that's one I'm really looking forward to. I got the 2 DLCs, and now I just need to try to find someone to buy it and play it with me. Someone who might be recording this with me should maybe do that. Other than that
We'll have to
though,
see.
I'm gonna try. And then to what is it, to cut us off, we're gonna end it with Horizon Forbidden West got a recent patch which added in text scaling options, and they specifically mentioned the Steam Deck for it, so it seems like they have that in mind. But for me, the highlight of that was they actually updated the Intel XeSS upscaler to 1.3. And from a lot of my tests, I've been seeing XeSS actually looking much better while running around the same as like FSR. So like before, I noticed XeSS had worse performance, but it did look better, and now it seems like the performance is catching up.
Okay.
And I'm really happy to see that. So getting Horizon Forbidden West to update XeSS, and I'm in the process of doing more testing like to compare it, but like I think that's a wonderful wonderful boost for it.
Which FSR version does Horizon Forbidden West use?
I believe they use FSR 2. I don't think, or actually no, they use FSR 3. I'm pretty sure.
Oh wait, no, it's
I have
2.2. It's 2.2.
okay, so I was right with my first guess. I should
You should have
I
doubled
should know
down.
that. I should have doubled down. I second guessed myself because what is it? Ghost of Tsushima is using FSR 3.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was like, and that's also Nixie's, which Nixie, God, whenever they are
Such a
attached to a
good
port,
studio.
I have so much more confidence in what they are, how it's going to perform.
Oh, for sure.
And
If I see their
and
name on it, like it's a stamp of approval from me. Like I know the port's going to be
exactly,
quality. Um,
exactly. So I think since they're using it in Ghost of Tsushima and Horizon Forbidden West wasn't too far off,
yeah.
I think I assumed it was 3, but now I'm remembering they actually commented saying FSR 3 is coming to
Okay.
Forbidden West, but it's not there
Okay. Yeah, that's
yet.
probably why AMD has definitely lagged behind a little bit in FSR 2 and well, FSR quality improvements until
Yeah,
3.1, I think. Because 3
I
is
think
just 2.2 with the frame generation, but 3.1 is now going to actually have better image stability and everything. Which is good because it's been almost a year and a half without any major updates to FSR.
right? But like, what is so? Have they said anything about like when that would be released? I don't think I've seen anything
3
about like
point,
a
let me
yeah. I haven't.
see.
I don't think I've seen anything about when 3.1 will be brought out
It was
because it would be
announced
really
at
nice.
GDC. I know that. Let me
Yeah.
see.
I missed that presentation.
Let's see. I believe that it is said they said this summer, I believe.
Okay, so probably around like June, July. maybe May
Yeah, I
at the
might be wrong. I'm
earliest.
not seeing it immediately, but I think they said this summer.
Okay.
And yeah, so FSR 3.1 should actually bring real improvements to FSR that aren't just frame
Mhm.
generation. So I'm really excited for that.
I mean, I'm glad they're doing it though. I haven't seen any FSR, like the frame generation hasn't really been implemented well on the Steam Deck.
It
Like
hasn't been
for
implemented
most.
well anywhere. I'm going to be honest. I have a 7900
Really?
XTX in my PC,
Mhm.
and I was just last night playing Remnant 2, which has FSR
Mhm.
3 and frame gen. And I was on like max settings, getting like 70. Well, no, it was like 90 FPS, and then I enabled frame generation, and it went down to 80. So
Literally the opposite effect of what you want to
yes,
have.
yes. To be fair, I am playing on a high refresh rate 4K monitor, so it's
Okay.
possible that there's a bandwidth limitation for maybe FSR 3 doing proper upscaling or something, or the
Mhm.
proper frame generation, but it's not great so far. I'm hoping that I'm hoping that they actually make it more worthwhile. I know they
Mhm.
did say it is best if you can barely hit 60. So it might
Yeah.
just be that my stuff is too powerful and the Steam Deck is too weak. I'm not sure.
Mhm.
I hope that they polish it up though.
Yeah. I mean, I have seen some official implementations doing okay. Infinite Wealth has FSR3 frame generation, and I remember testing it on the ROG Ally and turning it on, and it worked fine.
Yeah.
Like it was actually pumping it up to 60, which was really nice. But on the Steam Deck, it just doesn't work. And I think the most recent example I can think of where it was like very obvious it wasn't working was actually the Thaumaturge.
Oh,
It released on the Steam Deck, and when they released, they actually locked behind the graphic options, but their default was FSR3 with frame generation turned on, and it was all over the place. Like it was
right.
a very stuttery 30 FPS. What makes it weirder though is it can be implemented well. There's a mod that was created by this guy named Luke FZ,
Yeah.
and it's locked behind Patreon. But you can inject FSR3 and frame generation into games that have FSR2 in it, and it works real well.
I
Like
used his
for
mod
most games,
for sorry, I used his mod for Cyberpunk, and yes, it worked very well even on my computer.
yeah,
But
it's
yeah, his seems to be more consistent than any in-game implementation I've seen, which is insane to me.
I'm curious. I actually might want to like try talking to him. I'm curious, like how is he getting it right, but studios that are doing it officially just haven't been able to do it yet.
That's a
Like,
good
what is he
question.
doing different?
That's yeah, that would be a good interview, I think.
So, that's something that I'd like to kind of get to the bottom of.
Yeah.
But nice little segue talking about some updates to games though. Fallout 4 had their next gen patch yesterday, and that was a nightmare on the Steam.
Decidedly last gen.
Yeah, yeah, they actually regressed a little bit. So, for some reference, it was about a week ago they announced that they were going to be pushing out a next generation patch for Fallout 4. It seems like it was more geared for the consoles like PS4, PS5, Xbox Series X. They were all going to get updates to push them to 60 frames per second, improve their visual quality. They added in some new content. But there was a PC version of the patch as well, and they were going to add in some like maintenance stuff and stability improvements, and they were going for the Steam Deck verified badge, which they were playable before. And the biggest thing I think that was stopping them from being verified was actually their launcher. And with this new next gen patch, they removed the launcher, so now you can just boot into the game immediately. The problem is the launcher is the only place that has any graphical options. So it just like the Thaumaturge where they locked the graphic options on the Steam Deck, they essentially did the same thing with Fallout 4, and it something I haven't confirmed. I don't know if it saves your last use graphics, but if it's your first time playing, it probably does an auto detect, and it auto detects to ultra. So you're stuck with like the highest quality, which sometimes works and then sometimes it really doesn't. On top of that, the new update broke mod support, so any mods that were helping to improve performance could not be used anymore. And then we have the frame pacing issue, which on Steam Deck OLED, you had a massive frame pacing issue, which would just cause way too much instability. And any mods that were fixing that were now broken. So Bethesda has they have a history of doing these horrible patches that just break mod support, which a lot of these modders, especially like the community patches, they fix up the issues that these games have. And it's like these patches just kind of actively roll back any improvements, usually add more bugs, and don't actually help. Like the PC version of the next gen patch didn't really add anything. It didn't fix much. Like they added in the new content, which I think they had like three mod packs that were added with like new weapons and skins and some decoration items for Halloween. But other than that, all it did was break mod support, and then on Steam Deck, you can't change the graphical options without, you know, making the
Yeah.
game and making the game think that you're not on a Steam Deck.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it just goes to show that Bethesda's a great game developer, but a really bad engine developer. Like
Yeah.
the community with the unofficial patches, like every Bethesda game that I've played, I immediately go look for an unofficial patch because I know that those are going to be more reliable than anything Bethesda puts out. Like,
To be
uh,
honest, like I agree. Like one of the things that I think Bethesda does really well is actually not something that they do. It's the community. I have
yeah,
never seen. There's only like a couple of games where I've seen like a modding community that is as robust
yeah,
as the ones for Bethesda games. Like I don't think I've ever modded a game as much as I've modded like Bethesda's like Skyrim or Fallout. Just it's so wonderful the tools that they've been able to provide so that the community can do it. But then the way they patch games, it seems like they're very anti-community in
yeah.
that sense, and I feel like that's what's driving the lifespan of these games.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, like they might be onto something because the community will always pick it up, even if they break things horribly. I mean, even Skyrim with the Legendary Edition, it was broken for 3 months, and now it's the only edition that anybody plays. But it's just like they know that where they go, people will follow, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that at some point that goodwill has to break down because yeah, like now Bethesda games are more of a modding framework than an actual game at this point. Like it's
Yeah.
they definitely need to realize that the community is the reason that Skyrim is still selling to this day.
Mm-hmm.
It's not because they like made a perfect game or anything. It's because it can
Mm-hmm.
be molded into what the person wants to play.
Yeah, and it's not to say that the Bethesda games are bad. Like there
Oh no.
is no doubt that Skyrim is like for when it released in 2011, it was a groundbreaking game.
Yeah.
Like they did extremely well. But like you said, I would consider them more as mod framework developers at this point. Like
Yeah.
I'm sure like Starfield has the inklings of a good game, but I don't think it's going to be as good as it will be once modders have taken over
Yeah,
essentially. And
exactly.
and there's some good mods out there and there's community patches for it, but I don't think it has as much support as like Fallout 4 does or Skyrim does. Not yet at least. But,
No, and I know a few
I
mod
think that's
developers have abandoned it as well because of the
yeah.
engine issues with it. It's just there's too much game crammed into that old engine at this point.
Mhm. They really should have updated the engine.
Oh
Like
yeah.
I'm actually shocked that they haven't. It makes me worried for Elder Scrolls 6. Like are they updating the engine for that? Like the Starfield was to them it was a very ambitious project. So why wouldn't they update the engine to accommodate for this ambition,
Well,
you
they did
know?
update the
And
engine, but the problem is the engine needed a gutting. It was built on the technology of the time, which was Xbox 360, PS3,
yeah.
PS4, and it was built on slow hard drives and everything else. But that's not the world we're
Mm,
living in anymore. And the loading screens every 2 seconds is not something you can get away with in 2024 or God forbid
no.
2026 when Elder Scrolls 6 might sort of be previewed.
And they what is it? They talked about how seamless Starfield was going to be.
Hmm.
And it makes me a little bit sad to see that it's not what they promised completely. Like I think they delivered on some of it, and I really like the combat of Starfield.
Yeah,
Like it feels good to like run around, jump around, and shoot enemies. Like I really like how refined the combat system is, but it's just a chore to go from planet to planet
yeah,
and keep flying everywhere. Like I don't find any joy in like doing that.
yeah,
I didn't expect like a whole No Man's Sky kind of deal where you can just start flying into a planet and it'll very it's not like super quick, but it is fluid where you'll still like be in your ship. There's no loading screen, and then the entire world will load, and you
yeah,
can fly around and land wherever. I wasn't expecting that level, even though they kind of alluded to it being that kind of level. But
yeah,
just the loading screens are too much.
yeah. No,
So
exactly. Like
here's
it's
here's hoping that they create a new base, like a new base engine that they're going to use that is updated for current gen hardware.
yeah,
You know,
that's exactly it. Yep. They need to
but
actually do streaming and stuff. They can't just rely on monolithic like levels or anything anymore. And I know that'll
no.
complicate modding especially, but it's a step that needs to be taken if they want to keep selling games. That's the unfortunate truth of it.
Hopefully with their new engine they do prioritize modding too. Like I think that's going to be very important moving forward for Bethesda games. I think they have to put a better focus on modding, especially with an updated engine that's going to make modding harder just because of updated technology. They have to put a focus on like providing good tools, and any way that they can ease people into modding like this is going to be imperative for the lifespan of their games, because again they are really great at creating these addicting modding frameworks where people just add in whatever they want. Like I can't play Skyrim now without my keyblades. Like that's what I like to swing around. Like I can't help it. And hopefully that is something that they will do for like Elder Scrolls 6 and the next Fallout, because I love Fallout. Like I love the series. Even if I wasn't a big fan of Fallout 4, and the next gen patch has made it where I will most likely not be playing it for a bit, I do still love the series. Like I really got into Bethesda games from Fallout 3. Like that was my first like big intro into Bethesda, and then, Skyrim came out and all that, but I love Fallout 3. And so I'm really hoping that they take these lessons learned and maybe not release patches that will break support.
Yeah.
And you know and on the Steam Deck specifically, it's just not really as enjoyable. Like luckily, um the frame pacing issue that was affecting Steam Deck OLED, a Proton hotfix was actually just released at the time, like right before we started recording. A Proton hotfix was released to fix that on the OLED, so that might not be much of an issue anymore. But getting Valve to step in and fix it, that's not something that I would want to rely on.
Exactly.
But
And I mean, even then, that doesn't fix the fact that you can't change your settings.
yeah,
Like that still needs to be
now
addressed.
yeah, now you can get around that by making the game think it's not on a Steam Deck. So you have to put in a launch command, which is Steam Deck equals 0, like percentage command percentage,
Yeah.
um, and that brings the launcher back up. But then again, that's the reason why it was verified. So now you're back to just what it was
Yeah.
before.
It's actually less
No,
friendly now than it was prior to the
yes,
update because now you need to actually
no,
input a specific launch command and then also use the launcher.
yeah, no. It would be really nice to just have the graphic options in the game. Like I wish they just moved it.
Yeah.
Then that would have made it much better for me. But in good news, there are games that are, putting in good patches that are really helping the Steam Deck, other than the ones that we talked about previously. There's a game that just released last week called No Rest for the Wicked, which is from Moon Studios, who made the Ori games, and they are very much supportive of the Steam Deck. And before release, the co-founder, Gennady, I really hope that's how he says his name. I'm really sorry if I butcher it. Um, he posted on X about like showing the game running on the Steam Deck, saying like, yeah, they care about the Steam Deck. It'll be running on day one, and it did technically run on day one, but it wasn't. It wasn't there. It uses way too much memory, and it was crashing. And some people couldn't get past the prologue. I crashed on the prologue from too much RAM usage, and using the changing the UMA buffer to 4 GB, that did help. I think some people are still getting crashes from it, but it made the crashes much less frequent for me. But after 1 week of it being released, they had released 5 patches, 5 whole patches, and a lot of them were improving performance, memory usage, and rendering capabilities to make the game look significantly better. Um, Memory usage hasn't really gotten a huge overhaul yet, but I know that is something that is very high on their to do list. But I love seeing how fast that they've been pushing out updates, especially for a week. Just 1 week, then they pushed out 5 updates, and they're working on their sixth right now. Like for a release soon. Like I think that's insane.
Yeah, that's a crazy pace. And I mean, we love to see games especially focus on lower end hardware to make them
Mm-hmm.
stretch a little further. So them optimizing for that hardware, not targeting ridiculous hardware to begin with, but just trying to shuffle that bar down is huge, especially like so shortly after release and from such a prestigious studio. It's great to
Mm-hmm.
see that they care about people who don't necessarily have the latest and greatest or want to play on something like the Steam Deck. Like once that memory overhaul comes out, then hopefully the crashing will just be
Mm-hmm.
completely gone, and it'll be an easy recommend for the deck. Yeah.
Yeah. I will say that while the memory is still from my playthroughs of it, I haven't played the newest patch, so I haven't played with the fifth patch. I've played with the fourth one, and they've had some very good improvements. There's still some memory issues, like, and I do believe that there's still some crashes, but like I remember when I first was playing and I had to change the resolution scale to 50% just to get through the first boss with little drops. Before I think the default for performance was like 80%, and it looked great, but also I had way more drops. Like I would have like drops down to like 16, 17 frames per second, and getting to 50% render resolution, I got around like 27, 28 every now and then.
Yeah.
And, to Moon Studios' credit, they do simulations on 60 frames per second, no matter what frame rate you're on. So it still feels very precise, like no matter the frame rate that you're running, which I think was a great move from them. But after the fourth patch, I was able to keep it at 80% render resolution and get around the same performance I was getting at 50,
Oh
and it
wow.
looked
Okay.
much better. So the patches that they're putting on, they're definitely doing something. It's not like they're just putting out these little fixes here and there. They're actually overhauling a lot in the back end to make it run much better. And while it could be said that they could have done this before they launched into early access, the fact that they're doing it so fast, I think, makes up for that fact.
Yeah, and I mean it's still in early access. There's nothing wrong with updating your game and having these problems while you're in early access. It's the problem
Hmm.
is releasing the full version with the problem still intact.
Yeah. No, I think they've got a really great system so far. I've talked to the co-founder a bit. Like we talk every now and then, and every conversation I have with him, he's super excited. He'll tell me when the patches are coming out, and I love that he does it. And if you're watching this, please keep doing that. I love getting those updates because it's just I'm so busy that sometimes I'll miss it. But that gives me so much more confidence to how it's going to perform in the end on like the Steam Deck, and just the care that the studio is putting into the game.
Yeah.
So good job, Moon Studios. Like I'm extremely excited to see how it's going to evolve. And then on top of that, Ghostwire Tokyo actually got the de novo DRM removed from the game. And not many games do that, and I like that. I like it when it happens. And this is a bit of an older one, and should I haven't tested it yet. It should improve the Steam Deck's performance a little bit, but just Denuvo is such a chore,
Yeah.
you know. So I'm so happy to see Ghostwire Tokyo getting rid of, or they already did, but getting rid of Denuvo in general.
Yeah, no, I mean, like every game that I've tested with Denuvo, and then like either pre or post Denuvo, or like in some cases like working around it by using a different executable or whatever. Like every time the
Mm.
performance is pretty obviously night and day. So this should, like, I know Ghostwire was largely considered not possible on the Steam Deck for a while there.
Mhm.
Hopefully this alleviates the issue enough where it can be like perfectly playable, even if it's at 30. Just some way to play on the deck would be huge. And
Right?
I personally put a couple hours into Ghostwire when it came out, and I loved the game. So I would like to get back into it, and if I could do it on the deck, that
Mhm.
would be even better.
See, I remember I didn't play as much of the game when it released, but I love the visual style that they went
Oh
with.
yeah.
I love how colorful and like magical it is. I love that the particle effects of just every weapon that you have. I thought it was just so cool.
Yeah,
You know?
the cool hand sign stuff. Like I loved it.
Yeah.
Like the I loved the like Japanese
Mhm.
demonology and everything. It was so cool. There's like some little dungeons that are like altered spaces and
Yeah.
stuff. I just loved it. So I
No,
would love
I
to
love
go
the
back to it. Yeah.
right. So hearing that they removed Denuvo made me very happy.
Yeah.
So Um, I actually, so I didn't write about that. I read it on Gaming on Linux, which is another site run by Liam. Uh, if you haven't checked it out yet, go check out the site.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful website. Just focuses on any updates for games and just any Linux news in general. And he covers a lot of Steam Deck because Steam OS
Yeah.
is Linux. But if you want to get more into like Linux operating system and just another source of news for Steam Deck stuff, like can't recommend them enough.
Yeah.
Like he's
Very good
awesome. He's a
resource.
great guy, and I love the site. But let's move on to a little bit more somber news with the discourse right now going on about Nintendo DMCA'ing Gary's mods. And that one I've done a little bit of research, but I think you've come across a couple of things that I haven't. So, I do want to talk about that. But basically, there's been some DMCA strikes against mods for Gary's mod, and they've all been related to Nintendo. And there was some discussion around whether they were actually from Nintendo or if they were fake, because there are uh, people, prominent users that will send fake DMCA strikes for Nintendo. I don't know what their motivation is because they don't work for Nintendo, and I don't think they have any affiliation with Nintendo.
I don't think so
But they'll
either. I
just
get the impression that it's the same people that really hate on emulation in general. They see Nintendo as something to be protected, so I feel like that they take that onto themselves. At least that's my impression. I could be wrong, but
it's a weird thing. I don't know how to justify it because like one we support emulation, of
yeah.
course, but I just don't understand like why anyone would feel the need to protect Nintendo when they do that themselves most of the time. Like they'll do it to an obnoxious extent, like
Yeah.
with what happened with Yuzu
I've
and
talked to a few
by association
people like
Sega.
in that mental camp before. I worked with some before as well, and I think the problem is that Nintendo is such a core part of their being, growing up with them and being
Mhm.
like basically what they did every day. They go home, play Nintendo with people and everything, so it becomes a
Yeah.
core part of their identity. So they imagine it as a slight on the thing that they love so much, and
Mhm.
it's a really weird gray area and everything. But of course, I mean, sending out fake DMCA's like is not exactly good. I don't know if it's illegal, but you probably shouldn't be
Mhm.
doing it. um
No.
but I mean, yeah, the story in general is on April 24th, Gary from Gary's Mod posted that there was a lot of Nintendo stuff on the Steam Workshop for Gmod, that was getting pulled down, and he was asking other people to pull it down too because he got a DMCA. And just today, or actually yesterday, April 25th, the
Mm-hmm.
Gary came out publicly on X and like started addressing this because a lot of people were saying that the DMCA was fake,
Mm-hmm.
and he was asking for help to try to break it down because it came like the email came from a what seems like not a Nintendo address, and there's a lot going into it. It's pretty confusing. Basically,
Mm-hmm.
nobody knows, but I think it's erring more on the side of fake than a legitimate DMCA, especially
Mm-hmm.
because most of the things that I've noticed on Gary's Mods Steam Workshop, I own the game. I used to play it a lot. Were easily under fair use. They were recreated similar assets, but they're like not actually like, for instance, a Mario model. It wasn't ripped directly from the game or anything. A lot of times they're just like a fan made iteration of Mario or something.
Mm-hmm.
And that I believe falls under fair use. I'm not a lawyer, obviously, but that seems to be what a lot of the confusion is about. And I think that it
Mm-hmm.
needs to. I hope that Nintendo makes an official statement on it, one way or the other, because it's just pretty confusing right now.
I think didn't Gary say as well that he got confirmation that the DMCA strikes were legitimate from Nintendo?
He said that he got confirmation from the same email address that originally sent them, which may not be a
Okay.
Nintendo email address.
Okay.
So in this tweet that I'm specifically referencing, maybe this
Mm-hmm.
can go up in the edit afterwards.
Yeah.
But he's asking if the email domain is correct or not. He's asking if they have a different domain. Does that mean that they're not working on behalf of Nintendo? Has anyone gotten confirmation that it's fake from Nintendo anytime in the last 10 years? And have we got any confirmed real Nintendo DMCAs that look
Mm-hmm.
different? And some of the replies to the tweet mention that usually the DMCAs come from a very specific Nintendo email address that does not have the same origination as the email that he got. So that's why I'm erring on the side of it's probably fake. Um,
I'm looking at the comments for it right now, and there's someone who actually put a comment that did a who is of mm
yeah,
hyphen
I'm looking at that right
nintendo.com
now.
description,
Yeah,
and it says the admin or the where's the admin organization is Nintendo of America Inc. Is that
yeah,
something that like someone could fudge?
yeah. You just have to fill that in whenever you
Okay.
register a domain. You can technically, it's illegal, but you can put anything there. But I will say that Mark Monitor is like, I just Googled it now. It says corporate domain management. So it's possible that that's what
Mhm.
Nintendo's going through. But it seems very odd that they would choose to spoof this
Mhm.
other subdomain rather than the normal Noah legal at noa.nintendo.com, which is
Yeah.
usually where they come from, according to this at least.
Mhm. Well,
So
if
yeah, I
it's
don't know. It's very confusing.
yeah, if this is all like fake DMCA's, it's gonna make me it makes me very upset in general to seeing that because like you said, these aren't ripped from games. It's usually a fan made recreation inspired
Yeah,
by the games. But as far as I know, again, not a lawyer either, but I would assume it's under fair use because it's their creation. It's just inspired by
exactly.
you
Yeah.
know, but but I don't know. I also unfortunately wouldn't put it past Nintendo to do something like this, but at the same time, like I don't recall them really ever going for mods like this before. Like I know they've gone for like recreations of their games. Like I remember the was it Link's Awakening that was essentially remade, and
Yeah.
they took that down.
Yeah,
I
they're
do remember that, but
they take down like Pokemon ROM hacks a lot. They do that.
yeah.
Things that use original art, even if you dump it on your own, like that's pretty sketchy.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, I don't know about just direct mods. Usually, as long as they aren't redistributing code or assets, they're safe. But
Mhm.
it's Nintendo. I wouldn't put it past them to at least try, even if they didn't have legal standing to do so,
Yeah.
because I mean, so many people will just immediately shut down whatever they're working on, even if it's completely in the clear, just because they do
Mhm.
not have as much money as Nintendo to throw at a court case.
Yeah, Nintendo's in a good position in that sense where they could probably just, so like put down a claim or like say, "Hey, do this," and then it'll scare people off.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just because of the sheer amount of money that they have and that they're willing to put to things like this.
Yeah. Exactly.
So it's a little bit scary, and it's something I do want to follow. I don't know whether it's fake or not. I am hoping that it's fake because I don't believe I've ever seen Nintendo take this kind of step before for modifications for games. Like modifications for like games, not modifications for their own games. Like you said, ROM hacks and like Link's Awakening, that was taken down, but that was a modification for their game.
Yeah.
But like, games like Gary's Mod, Framemakers, Rivals of Aether, they all have mods where like they would add in Nintendo characters to their games.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen and like Gary's Mod has been around for a long time. So and they've never taken action like that before. So I don't know what would prompt them to do something like that now.
Yeah.
You know. So
Yeah. I don't
here's
know.
hoping it's fake and things get reinstated. Because I have like I said, like Bethesda games are usually the ones I've mod the most. The only one that might hold a candle to it and probably have overtaken it is Gary's mod.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I remember having like Apoc Hedgie's mods, like his like Nintendo models, like he did Sonic models as well, right? Because I
Yes. Yeah.
remember getting Sonic models too,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Way back in
those
the
were
day.
great, And I remember setting up all these scenes. I have one where like Link was sitting on a jukebox with like one of the best faces that you could possibly make. And it was good. It was a good time. I want to be able to do that. So, here's hoping it is actually fake. Um, One thing I was actually surprised by recently on the Steam Deck was a couple of games that we reviewed in the past couple of days. So, um, one of our other writers reviewed the new city building game Manor Lords on the Steam Deck, and I tried out the beta for Frostpunk 2, which are both city builders. And usually, city builders have a bad rep on the Steam Deck because as you get further and further into the game, it becomes very CPU intensive. And both these games performed very admirably on the Steam Deck, even on the later side. And Frostpunk 2 is still in beta, so I expected much worse, but I was playing at like 40 frames per second on there, and my base was getting pretty big. And Manor Lords, he was able to play at a stable 30 frames per second, and I'm honestly surprised at that.
Yeah, I mean, especially like Manor Lords looks beautiful. So the fact that they're able to squeeze that much performance out of it is great.
Hmm.
Um, I think the problem is just that city builders over the past few years were heavily single threaded, especially like City Skylines one at least. I'm not sure about
Yeah.
two. So like it would just absolutely crumple on something like the Steam Deck. I mean, I've got it running on there, but once you hit like 40,000 pop, you're done. And there's not much that can be done for that. So I'm happy that I might be able to actually play a city builder on the go if these shake out to be as performant as it seems they will.
I think so. I think Manor Lords was actually just released today. It just released into early access, and I think it's like 25% off, so it's around $30 right now um for entrance into it. And it was the most wishlisted game on Steam. Like it had over 3 million wish lists, which is pretty insane. Like some of our staff at Steam Deck HQ were really 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 excited about the game. And I remember I told him that we got the review key for it, and he was like jumping for joy. He was so excited. I don't think he's actually played it yet, but I know that's going to be something like as soon as he gets free time, he's going to be like, "Hey, let me play. So he's just gonna take over. But like it's really interesting to see it. And both Frostpunk 2 I don't think has controller support, but they made a custom input, like they made a controller configuration through Steam input, and Manor Lords actually has controller support.
Okay.
And I thought that was pretty surprising. City builders don't usually have controller support. It's one of those genres where I find it very hard to translate to a controller. Like with the Steam Deck, it's really easy because they have the touchpads.
Yeah.
But and that's how I played Frostpunk 2. Like even though they had the controller configuration, I ended up just using the touchpad and then the right trigger to left click, left trigger to right click, and that was just mainly how I worked. But Manor Lords actually put in controller support, and I was pretty surprised by that.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, historically, city builders, or I mean, any RTS style game like Civ, if you remember back in the PS3 era, they were making specific games that were offshoots just for the controller support on the consoles,
Mhm.
of like Civ 4 and everything. I forget which one that was. But yeah, no, it's really cool that it can be built into any of them, and it's cool that the Steam Deck can just kind of like figure it out as you go because
Yeah.
the touchpads.
No, I think it's a good showing, and I hope that more city builders do take like Frostpunk 2 and Manor Lords like ideas and they incorporate them performance wise. Since honestly, city builders are one of those where I would love to just pause it, put my deck and suspend, and then come back to it. And that's becoming more and more important to me as a new father. I feel like I've had multiple times already where I'm like testing a game and then I hear my daughter crying and I just have to put in suspend, leave it, run over, make sure she's okay, then come back and just pick up where I left off. So it's becoming more and more important to have that feature, and I'm glad that these games are starting to optimize a bit more. Like one game I would love to see get some better optimization in general because I'm pretty sure it's still single threaded is RimWorld.
I
I
think you're correct.
love
Yeah.
RimWorld. I love RimWorld so much. Like there's no doubt. Like if I could play that on my deck, I would love to. And it plays okay, but again, it's one of those games where later on when your colony is bigger, it starts to drop.
Yeah.
So no, and it doesn't have controller support either. So it's like Frostpunk 2, where they have a controller configuration through Steam Input, which essentially is just a bunch of shortcuts.
Yeah.
Um, but and it's better than nothing. Though again, I just tend to not care about it as much and just use the trackpad.
Yeah.
Um, but it's still exciting, and I hope that more games will incorporate that. And Manor Lords having controller support makes me extremely happy in general. Um, Speaking of Steam Decks, though, recently refurbished Steam Decks came back in stock, which I thought was really exciting. But then there was like I guess, a little discourse. I remember making a post about it on X, and then I also posted about the refurbished Steam Decks coming back on Lemmy, and which we do have a community of Lemmy as well, and Reddit. But and I'm trying to balance both with my extremely busy schedule. And on Lemmy, I believe there were some comments that were like, why would anyone get the refurbished Steam Deck over like the OLED model that's there right now? Because the OLED model has some great improvements, like the bigger battery, the screen goes without saying. The screen,
Yeah.
it's lighter to hold. The heat dissipation is so much better.
Yeah.
I remember on like the LCD decks, like the heating is just not like it doesn't dissipate the heat as quickly, and it can get really hot. And I remember playing the same game on both, and just the OLED it never got hot.
Yeah.
It was wonderful. Um, but I think it's an interesting topic. Like, at what point would like a refurbished Steam Deck be more worthwhile than like biting the bullet and getting like the OLED model?
Well, I mean, I think that that's a question of disposable income, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, when it comes down to it, the I'm looking at right now, the 256 gigabyte refurbished LCD Steam Deck is $320, which is only $20 more than a new Nintendo Switch. And
Hmm.
you have a much larger game library and all the power that comes with a Steam Deck, and it's a whole computer. Um, but I mean, you're only talking the cheapest OLED is 549, which is an extra $230 on top of that.
Yeah.
So you're basically doubling the price to
Hmm.
get the OLED, which I mean, I personally think that's a very good upgrade. But as somebody who grew up pretty poor, like that's the difference between getting something and not getting something at all. And also,
Hmm.
it's not like the Steam Deck LCD is a bad device. I still have two. Like, there's one over there right behind me. You can see it over next to my printer, right over there. And then another one right there. And like, they're still phenomenal devices. And I still use them
Hmm.
just as often. Like, yeah, they're a little harder to cool, but unless you're absolutely throwing like Cyberpunk at it or something or Returnal, like most of the time you're not going to notice a difference. The biggest difference you're going to notice is the screen, and the second one is battery life. And as long as you're
Yeah.
okay with compromising on those two things for half the price, like get a refurbished one. Like there's not really a reason to not at that point.
I would say like I think the most surprising thing is think about it as just an entry level into handheld PC gaming or just PC gaming in general.
Oh yeah,
Like to get that kind of power, like I think the most worthwhile deal is that 64 gigabyte model, which
yeah,
is out of stock right now because it seems like I'm not the only person that feels that. But the 64, imagine getting into PC gaming, having a PC that you can take wherever you go that has like very comparable performance to a lot of like mid-range gaming laptops.
yeah,
And it was only $280.
yeah. I mean, even at the three hundred and
That's
twenty
insane.
dollar price point, like that's
Yeah.
you can buy a Chromebook for that, and that's just about it. So like it's phenomenal for that value. Like it's insane that
Mhm.
they managed to get the price that low.
Right? No, that's it's incredible. I do what is it? We did write an article or I wrote an article about like what would make the OLED like what makes the OLED upgrade worthwhile. And I have to pull it up because I don't remember the exact points I made, but one of my favorite things is that heat dissipation. Like it really makes a difference to me. Like I remember with the LCD, I was always so concerned about, it getting too hot, which is why like in our reviews we have what is it? We have a temperature thing. We do have like we where we tell you what kind of temperature we're getting on the Steam Deck. That's why it's there. With the OLED, I would not feel like it's necessary to give that information anymore because it has never gotten to the point where I was actually worried.
Yeah,
Um, but granted, it's good to still have the information. We like to be as transparent as we can possibly be.
yeah,
But like, to me, that's one of the biggest things. And one of the most prominent parts I remember actually about recommending the OLED is I put down the screen as a maybe.
yeah,
Like maybe that would be worthwhile. Like
yeah,
to me, that wasn't like a dramatic like reason to do it because you can change like the color temperature and you can simulate more saturated colors which give an OLED-ish feel to it. It's not true blacks or anything like that,
yeah,
so it's not OLED, but it gets close enough to where I don't feel like the OLED screen is a big reason to spend an extra $200. Now, would I recommend it? Yeah, of course. I'm a sucker for OLED, but like to me, it wasn't the big thing. The battery was a very big deal for me because in the end, and one of the reasons like that I started Steam Deck HQ is because whenever I saw people like recommending their settings, it was always pushing the Steam Deck to the
yeah,
max. But to me, it's a portable device. Like at its core, it's a device that I want a battery that will last because it is a handheld,
yeah,
you know. So I started it, and that's why I created like battery saving settings and that kind of stuff because I wanted to maximize like how much I got out of it. Like
yeah.
and like having the battery increase from 40 to 50 like that's a massive massive difference,
Oh yeah, yeah,
especially with how light Steam OS is compared to like Windows.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's huge. And I mean, originally with my LCD Steam Decks, I was usually sitting near an outlet. I'm sitting near an outlet less nowadays.
Hmm.
And like I get a lot of freedom from that OLED bigger battery and the smaller die and everything. So it's game changing to have that. I think the biggest thing for me was the screen, but yeah, the battery is an easy second thing.
Yeah.
And but again, not if the difference is between buying one and not buying one at all, like get the refurbished
Yeah.
LCD or just a new LCD if you want that, and that $140 is like a big deal for you, then the new LCD is still a great buy. Like it's not a bad
Yeah.
device by any means. So, and there's more things to tinker with it too. You
Yeah.
can't tinker with the OLED quite as much, but like you can really mess with the LCD if you're that kind of person.
That's why I think the 64 gigabyte was the best deal, because you could get that and then you could buy like a 1 terabyte or a two
Yeah,
terabyte SSD and just put that
yeah,
in there instead of the 64. Though if you are going to get a new, like, if you want to get a new like 256 gigabyte LCD, I'd probably just go for the refurbished, since it's $80 less.
yeah,
So
yeah,
the new 256 gigabyte LCD is $400, whereas the refurbished one is 320. So, like,
yeah,
with the testing that Valve does, save the $80. I
yeah.
mean, that $80, especially on PC, buying games that constantly go on sale, can go a long way.
Well, that
A
80 bucks
very
is more than enough to get a 1 terabyte SSD too.
That's
Like
yeah,
you
exactly.
could get the same storage as in the 1 terabyte OLED model, which I think is like 649,
Yeah.
but for like half the price. And like I said,
No,
like
it's
you can mod yours a lot. Like this one has a custom backplate, custom
mhm.
thermals, and everything, and Hall effect
is
joysticks.
that is
And
that the JSOX backplate?
yes, this is their original one. I have a RGB one that I've been meaning to put on, and I'm planning on
Yeah.
making a video for that, but I haven't gotten to that yet.
They
But
actually
yeah.
they actually today just released a updated version of that backplate
Ooh.
with better thermals, like better
Oh, interesting.
what is
Okay.
it?
Let me look that up.
They said they don't send me like actual press releases. The person just messages me on Discord whenever whenever something happens, which I think is funny. I appreciate it. I love when they do it, because it's actually like it doesn't get lost in the emails. And like, so when it was GDC and PAX East, I was getting like 40, 50 emails at a time, and I almost missed, or I actually did miss my invite to Summer Games Fest. And I tried to confirm a little bit late, and they still accepted it, which is great. And I cannot believe I'm going to Summer Games Fest. But um,
Jealous.
I missed the email. I'm glad JSOX doesn't do that, because I don't miss their stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's two upgrades to their accessories with the transparent backplate, the RGB transparent backplate, and then the transparent backplate vents.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
was it there's enhanced cooling with thermal grease, an aluminum heat dissipation sheet, and then the products are now more compatible with the OLED models.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I'll have to look at that. It doesn't
So
look like it's up on their site yet, but I'll have to
it should be, like, when they told me that it would be available 20, like, after they messaged me, they said it would be available for sale in 20 minutes.
okay.
So and
Maybe I'm
that
just
was
not seeing it,
earlier today.
but
No, it should be available now. And we'll put links for it down in the description. um but it is really cool to see them, like,
yeah.
improve the products more. Especially, I don't really feel the need to have it with like the OLED, but like LCD model,
Oh
like,
yeah.
I'm pretty sure that transparent cooling backplate is like $27.
And
And
I
and
have
and you could use
like
that $80, and that solves like one of the two big things that I would say
yeah.
I would recommend the OLED for, which
Yeah.
is that cooling.
Yeah, no, I replaced the thermal material on this with a PTM sheet, and then also like this one has this separate vent here. I have a whole
Yeah.
video if you're interested in it for the LCD deck. It doesn't, like
Mhm.
Noah said, it's not nearly as relevant for the OLED because it runs so cool. But for the LCD deck, like it's go watch the video if you're interested, and you'll see it's
Yeah.
insane how different it is. But if you're that kind of
We'll, we'll
person that likes tinkering, then the LCD deck makes a lot of sense.
we'll put a link. We'll put a link to the video in the description too, because it is definitely like I would recommend doing that for the LCD models, just because it can get very hot. Like, and you mentioned Returnal. I don't know who's playing Returnal on a Steam Deck, but you know,
I've played a decent,
so
like
it's
I don't know, a couple hours of it. Like, and I mean, I didn't get like crazy far in it, so I didn't like hit the worst performance. But like, no, I've been able to play it.
no, and you actually want to. I've never really got like stable frame rate for Returnal on any handheld that I have, but I'm using Ioneo's AMO2 mini PC as like my main like work PC right now. It runs Returnal really well. Like, I was genuinely shocked that I was playing Returnal at a solid 30 frames per second. Like,
Nice.
that was insane to me. Like, kudos to Ioneo. Like, for the price for this, and this is the model that looks like a SNES. So like it's modeled after
Oh,
the
this, oh, those
SNES, so
little
it
things.
has
Yeah, I love
like a
those.
really cool like red power button that can flip up the front, and it's just I love it. I absolutely love it. It's more it uses a was a 7840HS APU, so it's like
Okay.
it can take in more power than like the 7840U, just slightly more power. Not really like a big difference, but it's enough. Like, I was able to play Returnal.
Yeah.
So that's something. No.
All right.
So, you
One
know,
second. Sorry, I need to run
yeah,
real quick. I'll be right back. We're gonna cut this
no
part out, I'm
worries.
assuming. Sorry.
No, I want to keep this in.
Okay. Well, I mean, you do you.
Maybe it's something we can keep. I got an idea for it. No, never mind. I can wait. While he's doing that, let's see. Oh, cool. Great. As we're doing this, I haven't written the article. The article's going to go up before this, but it looks like Proton 9 just got a new release candidate. So it brought in a lot of the changes um, from Proton Experimental. So things like, Overwatch 2 no longer randomly crashes. Um, Come on, why would it do that? Let's see. I'm reading it. I'm actually reading it off of an email on my phone. So so we have um, games that were previously only playable with Proton Experimentals now playable with Proton 9.0, Sonic Colors Ultimate, Yuri's Revenge, Insanity Blade. Then some regressions were fixed. Borderlands GOTY Enhanced is playable again. Overwatch 2 no longer randomly crashes. Um, and then, let's see. Yeah, nothing too heavy, but there's some new games that are now playable with Proton 9, which is cool. Um, and then getting the fixed regressions is always nice.
I'm back. Sorry, somebody
Welcome
knocked on my
back.
door.
No worries. As you went to do that, there was a new. I got an email about Proton 9 getting a new update, so I
Ooh,
was just talking about that a little bit.
okay, cool.
I
Yeah,
know, right?
I just swapped over to using Proton GE 9-4
Yeah.
just just the other day.
Do you
And
use
it's
do
been pretty
you
solid.
do you tend to use Proton GE more than like the stable branch or the experimental branch?
I tend to use GE more, yeah. I like being able to pin my version. The stable, like stable is okay for that, but experimental
Mhm.
changes so often that it's hard to
Yeah,
actually nail any changes down. So I
that's
tend to use like the newest GE if I want to try to test something. But obviously during my actual game testing, I'll use like the newest GE, experimental, stable, and
mhm.
uh, now I'll be using GE8 as well because there's so many differences between 8
Yeah.
and 9. Yeah.
I have there's like one or two games where I've noticed where Proton G8 I use 8-32
Yeah.
and it works much better than 9. I can't remember
Yeah.
which game it was. It was a game I tried recently where it just would not work. The new System Shock update. So
Oh, yeah,
before it
yeah,
was
yeah.
released, I was testing the new 1.2 update, which had a lot of really wonderful Steam Deck improvements. Like talk about like an overhaul just on performance. And the only way I could get it to work was using Proton 8-32,
Yeah.
or Proton GE 8-32.
Yeah.
And even still, like the update wasn't fully done yet, so um, I wasn't able to really do big testing yet. But I did after it was released and it was working with the stable again, and it was wonderful.
Yeah,
Um,
Overwatch 2 also had a regression recently. My brother was trying to play, and until
yeah,
yesterday, 9/experimental didn't have any, like it was completely broken, and it was just crashing randomly
but
and everything. But
that's
using
so weird.
832 was fine.
That's so weird. A Proton experimental update on April 22nd actually fixed that. Actually pulled a regression that was supposedly fixed Overwatch 2 randomly crashing,
Oh,
and that was
maybe my days are off. It was very recently. I thought it was yesterday. I don't know.
no. I actually
Life's a
missed that
blur.
experimental thing. That was one of the regressions that was pulled into the new Proton 9 update
Okay,
that
cool.
was just released.
Perfect.
So
Okay.
yeah. All right, well then let's go ahead into our final topic of today, and probably the biggest one that I am most excited to talk about. We are going to talk about CryoUtilities. Now, if you don't know what CryoUtilities are, I'll have the man who created the utilities, which is the most popular Steam Deck tool that is used by almost everyone I know of that knows how to tinker with a Steam Deck to any degree. And it is known to help improve performance for a lot of games that oh, I'll let the man over here talk about it a little bit. But before we go into the questions I have, tell us about CryoUtilities in general, though.
Yeah, sure. So, basically, it's something that I wrote over many months after a bunch of
Mhm.
requests. We'll get a little more into the history in a little bit, I assume. And
Oh yeah.
it's a suite of utilities that focuses on performance enhancements, particularly for games that are either CPU or memory bottlenecked.
Hmm.
And it also allows you to do some game data manipulation. So if you have like a 64 gigabyte Steam Deck that has very limited storage, especially for something like the shader cache. You can
Hmm.
offload that to an SD card, and it will just seamlessly work as you swap your SD cards, and it'll sync all of your shaders to the location they're actually installed. Um, and it's had a few more features added and removed over time.
Hmm.
At one point, CryoUtilities had the trim support for your SSD before Valve actually implemented it for a little while. I might bring that back, not sure yet, but it's it's kind of evolved over time. But generally, it enhances performance and it gives you some cool utilities, and it works on Linux systems in general. But all the utilities are specifically targeted at the Steam Deck.
So, quick question, just because before I start asking like the other questions I had, you mentioned that Valve added trim,
Yeah.
and so why? So since you took it out, why would you add it back? Like, what would be the motivation to add it back?
Because Valve's trim, I mean, it does do the trim, like there's no problem with it, but I don't like
Hmm.
how you can't select a specific device.
Okay.
So let's say I want to trim my SSD, but not my micro SD because the micro SD takes 25 minutes, or vice
Hmm.
versa, just to prevent extra cycles. Then you'd want to
Hmm.
select a specific device, but theirs just does it on every single device you have connected, and
Okay.
there's no targeting it in any way. So I might add it back into where you could target a specific device just in the case that you wanted that one to be cleaned up for a download that you're doing to that device or something.
Okay. Well, then that makes sense because that's something that Valve hasn't implemented,
Yeah,
and it would give. I guess it would be a little bit nicer to have that kind of control, especially with how much control you have on a Linux system in general. Like,
exactly. Yeah.
it's nice. So, tell me a little bit about how CryoUtilities came into be. Like, what gave you the idea to create this utility?
Yeah, so in the very beginning, it wasn't called CryoUtilities. It was, it all spun off of my original Red Dead or original benchmarking video where I benchmarked Red Dead and it kept crashing and I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
figure out why. And I like eventually after that video came out, I tracked it down and found that it was there wasn't enough memory and Red Dead was just crashing when it ran out. So I increased
Mm-hmm.
the swap size. That was it.
Mm-hmm.
And I came out with another video showing that that the crashes were completely resolved and also the performance was increased a little bit by adding by increasing the swap size to at the time I did just 16 gigabytes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and from that video, my very, very early viewers, thank you if any of you are watching this, requested to not make it commands because the commands were just hard to run. So I wrote
Mm-hmm.
like the most simple bash script I could that you had to execute in terminal and it would just do it for you. There was no failure states or anything. If it filled up your drive, it filled up your drive, and then it would fail to boot because SteamOS had a bug back then. If your drive was full, it would fail to boot. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and more people started using it, and then I found out it worked really well for GTA as well. And then I also started finding out it worked well for Elden Ring and for Cyberpunk and other stuff. So that got me thinking about what the problem at its core was, which was memory management. So I started
Mm-hmm.
building it out a little bit, and I made what ended up being CryoUtilities 1, which was a Bash Zenity front end for those utilities. And it also at that time included trim because I noticed that
Mm-hmm.
my SSD performance was degrading over time, and I tracked that down to be the cause. And this again was before SteamOS 3.4 came out, which added trim. So that is how CryoUtilities 1 evolved. And then around that time, I realized that there was no way I was going to keep iterating on it in its current form because it was an absolute monstrosity. It was like a 400 line bash file, and it was dismal. Every time I wanted to change anything, I had to regression test the whole thing to high hell. So at that time I started like I'm a developer or DevOps engineer by trade. So I decided I'm just going to write a program for it, like a whole thing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I started like just workshopping it, and I ended up choosing Go because that's the language I was using at the time, and just picking a basically closing my eyes and picking a UI framework that looked okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's eventually that's how CryoUtilities 2 came out. And if you've seen the CryoUtilities 2 video announcement, you'll know exactly what state it was in at that time. But it added a ton of different like kernel tweaks to enhance the performance on CPU or memory bound games or any program at all. It works for anything. And then also, a lot of people at the time had 64 gigabyte Steam Decks and had that problem with the internal drive filling up. So that's when I added the storage management utilities as well. And since then, it's I've added a couple new features. Now there's a VRAM tab. It'll tell you how much VRAM you have and give you an option to boot straight into the BIOS if you want. So you can
Mm-hmm.
change it, the UMA frame size buffer. And yeah, it's gotten a couple things, a couple bug fixes, and it's on CU 2.3.2 right now, I believe. So yeah, that's how where we are.
I mean, it's an incredible tool. Like, I think it just hands down. I don't. I think you know that by now. Like, it really
So I'm
is.
told.
Um, what would you say? What would you say was the hardest feature you had to implement into CU?
The UI. The UI programming is not my forte, and
Hmm.
also I probably like the UI framework I use is very powerful, but it's also very rigid and it's hard to implement new stuff with it. If it was just a command line tool, it could have been out in a week. It took me 3 months. Uh, so the UI was the hardest feature. But other than that, I would say the data manipulation was the hardest because it relies on reading Steam's VDF files to find the library locations. And what games are installed where. And if Steam is open and you've installed the game since it was
Hmm.
closed, then it won't actually update those files until you close it. So then some
Hmm.
stale things can be there. It's a whole thing. But I would say it's definitely that data manipulation, because it's just so,
Hmm.
it was so finicky to make sure everything was in the right place and that the Steam cache file was even consulted properly.
Okay, well then let me ask you. Like we've seen like some like you've mentioned, there's games like Red Dead, GTA, Cyberpunk that have all had improvements with the modifications from CryoUtilities. Why do you think Valve hasn't implemented any of those? Like they've implemented trim, but like why haven't they implemented like being able to change the swap file size, for instance, or any of the other modifications you make to improve performance for the CPU bound and memory bound games?
Yeah. So, I mean, the second tweak I ever added was changing what's called the swappiness, which is how
Hmm.
often Linux will swap, because, or put stuff into the swap file, essentially, or swap in general.
Hmm.
And at the time, Valve was using a swappiness of 100, which is very high. And that means that it was not very, it was putting almost everything into swap, or a very large portion of stuff, so it would slow it down a lot, even with a small swap file as default. So what
Hmm.
you'd get is a lot of latency trying to do anything with memory, because it was stuffing everything into swap. So the second
Hmm.
thing that I ever recommended was swappiness set to 1, which means only store there if you absolutely 100% need to.
Hmm.
But don't just crash out. And that, they haven't set it down to 1 like I recommend, but they have since then lowered the default swappiness down to 60, which is much better than the old default of 100. So they
Hmm.
are listening to at least the methodologies behind what I've changed, because they did also make that change. Um, for the data manipulation tools, they haven't really
Hmm.
needed to do that, because they just discontinued the 64 gigabyte model, and almost nobody else had that problem.
Hmm.
And then for the other tweaks, those, it's hard to say. The the Venn diagram of people who know these really level Linux stuff, like commands and
Hmm.
everything, and the people who have time to actually look and test at all those things, are two separate circles. Like, they don't
Hmm.
overlap. Valve is a company, they have things that they need to do. Proton is a full-time job covering for some like games that just don't want to work for it and everything, like,
Hmm.
and on top of that, they all of their most talented engineers, I'm sure, were working on the OLED for a year,
Yeah.
so they needed to completely write everything from the ground up. um so I'm pretty confident that at some point some of my changes are going to make it in, other than swappiness, obviously. And the swap file is actually a little less mandatory now, because they implemented ZRAM in SteamOS 3.5.
Hmm.
um which helps a little bit. It still will have a lot of issues when memory is exhausted, but it doesn't tend to just crash anymore like it used to. But they are working their way towards the things. I think it's just that they just don't have enough time for the people who know how these things work to do all the testing that I've done for these
Hmm.
very low level things. And they just want to make sure that it's the most seamless device possible. So they don't just want to change things without putting them through the adequate pacing, which is very fair in my opinion.
So you don't feel any. I guess you don't feel like these are things that Valve needs to do as soon as possible. Like you think that them going at their pace, it's not imperative
I
that
don't
they
I-
do it.
yeah, I don't think so. I mean, the Steam Deck works fine. Like, it already performs pretty well across the board. I
Hmm.
mean, being a complex system, of course it's going to take some time to do anything. And I would say to err on the side of stability rather than tinkering with things. But over
Hmm.
the past year and 3 months now, my changes have been proven to be very valuable. So I would like to see them implemented. I would like, CryoUtilities is just a product of the times, basically. Like, if
Yeah.
all of its features were actually ported into SteamOS, I would be completely okay with that. Would I still maintain it for those who wanted to run it on non-Steam Deck systems? Maybe, but like, I would
Mhm.
like to see them upstreamed into actual SteamOS, since we have seen so many gains and no real problems, with maybe the exception of huge pages with Halo Infinite. Like, that's the
Mhm.
one thing I can say is like, it actually degrades the performance there. But other than that, like, yeah, I would like to see all the changes be upstreamed.
So you noticed that, or you mentioned something about how the changes have been mostly good, but we've also seen there's some detractors
Yeah.
from CryoUtility. So some people that have gone out and said like that this stuff does not work and that they are against it. How have you received any like specific feedback from these people saying like, oh, this specific thing doesn't actually work?
Yeah, I've heard a few things here and there. The the lesser, like, problematic one would be huge pages, like I mentioned before. Specifically with Halo Infinite, it causes crashing.
Mhm.
That one's like the low tier one. The other one is that a lot of people who have been in the Linux community for a long time hate changing the swap file size or the swappiness.
Mhm.
They understandably, in the past, when CPUs and GPUs were like, they had, with their own monoliths, their own towers, and they had
Mhm.
their own isolated memory stacks, forcing swap would be a bad idea.
Mhm.
It would impact performance negatively. But on these newer devices with APUs, with which have CPUs and GPUs that share a memory pool,
Mhm.
we've seen that the extra performance that you get, it's not negatively impacting anymore. And on top of that, it is outright preventing some issues like crashing in a lot of games that rely on putting a lot of stuff into memory really quickly and won't
Mhm.
let anything drop. So something like The Forest or Marvel's Midnight Suns would outright crash, and still do, without
Mhm.
CryoUtilities, or sorry, Sons of the Forest, because
Mhm.
they rely on putting a like 20 gigabytes of stuff into memory. And if you don't have that 20 gigabytes free, then it just crashes flat out when it loads. But
Mhm.
using swap allows you to circumvent that. And I think that the detractors are mainly focused on the old, like the classical computing stage, and the desktop PC, where you have an isolated CPU and a GPU and a separate memory pool and a separate storage device, and everything is its own little garden. But
Mhm.
these more complex integrated systems like the Steam Deck or any of the other handhelds that run on an APU or whatever, they're we have to think about them in a new way. They're doing things in a new way, so we have to realize that we need to mitigate new issues by using some classical techniques like increasing the swap file and decreasing swappiness.
Okay, so I mean, it overall, since these systems are not based on like the older style of, I guess, computer building or older technology, like
Yeah,
that, the swap file will actually be helpful
yeah.
versus not anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, like, there can be small performance degradations from using swap, of course, because you're
Mhm.
going from a memory device which is insanely fast to one that is pretty slow, relatively speaking. But
Mhm.
the benefits you get from the increased memory far outweigh the negatives from that transaction. Um, Especially when it comes to VRAM sharing the same memory pool, it's force evicting a lot of things that you're going to notice when gaming. You might not notice it when
Mhm.
you're running calculations or compiling code, because like, basically that's just a monolithic process that's like, oh, it's going to take 32 seconds, just flat out.
Mhm.
But in a highly latency sensitive situation where you're updating 60 on the OLED 90 times a second, you really need to worry about the micro stutter more than you need to worry about the raw throughput. And that's, I
Mm.
think, the disconnect between the what my utility does, which is focuses on evening the whole experience out and making sure there are no bad lag spikes, versus the more classical way, which is raw throughput is everything you need, because that's the way it was for 50 years. It's just now that we're finally moving on to a more latency sensitive like way of thinking.
Got it. And then one of the other things is in CryoUtilities, you also do recommend, like you said, the changing the UMA buffer
Yes.
um, to 4. That one is outside of CryoUtilities. It doesn't do that automatically. We actually have to change that in the BIOS
Right.
of the Steam Deck. Why do you recommend doing that for just the base version of CryoUtilities? Like as
Yeah.
a recommended change.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if first of all, if you want any more detail on any of these things, go watch my video on it. It's a 40-minute
Also,
video that deep dives into it. But for a very quick, it's more of a bug in the firmware than anything else. That
mhm,
basically the CPU, because it is the brain of the whole system, has first dibs on the memory. So
mhm,
what that means is if the VRAM swells up to, let's say, 4 GB, and the CPU needs at least 13 gigabytes, the Steam Deck only has 16 gigabytes to give, and that's
yeah,
more than it has. So what will happen is that the VRAM will be forcibly evicted. That one
mhm,
gigabyte of overlap will get forcibly evicted, and the CPU will take that memory, even if it only needs it for a single cycle. And then that
mhm,
memory's empty again. And then the VRAM has to load back from the disk and in. And what happens is that causes a lot of stutter in games. If you bring up the frame time graph, you'll see it fluctuate up and down really rapidly when it does that. Doing the or setting the UMA frame size buffer to 4 GB means that the CPU now only has a hard limit of 12 gigabytes to work with, and plus any swap you have. So that means that you won't get as many of those little bumps in the graph because the VRAM isn't getting forcibly evicted every frame.
mhm,
And that leads for a much smoother experience, even if the CPU has less to work with, provided you also have the swap space to compensate for that, which is why I recommend them in tandem. Setting the UMA frame size buffer to 4 GB and not increasing swap can help in some games. I know in Cyberpunk version 1.4, it actually helped quite a bit. But once they increased the density in 1.5, it got to the point where the CPU's 12 gigabytes of memory could no longer keep up. So you needed swap in addition to increase the performance there.
mhm.
But yeah, it's basically just a tug of war between the CPU and GPU, and it gives the GPU a little bit more breathing room in situations where the total RAM and VRAM will be more than 16 gigabytes.
Gotcha. Well, then it makes sense at that point. That's probably something that would help with No Rest for the Wicked as well, which has a bunch of memory issues. I bet for whatever reason, I didn't think about trying CryoUtilities when I was testing it, which is a shame because
I
I
see how it
changed the
is.
buffer size and that helped. But like now it makes sense that like there might be still some crashes with
Yeah.
just changing the 4 gigabyte buffer. So the swap files could really help out in that regard. Um, from your experience so far, what has been the game that you've seen has like the most positive impact from CU?
Um, that one's it's tough. That one's game dependent. So for
Yeah.
things like the first God of War, Huge Pages was a big boost. It was like an 8% boost on its own. That was before it was even included in CU, so I ended up including it later.
Mhm.
And that was the biggest single boost we saw in God of War. But in things like Horizon Zero Dawn, it was mainly swappiness, like preventing it from exchanging memory often kept the
Hmm.
micro stutters off your back, because Horizon Zero Dawn has a very bad micro stutter issue. And I
Hmm.
think that's a holdover from its porting process. But I mean, overall, I would say it's probably got to be swappiness, just because it's all encompassing. Everything benefits from having it lower because the memory latency is that much lower. And if I had to say secondarily, maybe page lock unfairness, which increases CPU performance by quite a bit. The Linux kernel by default tries to prioritize productivity tasks with throughput, but the latency is much worse.
Hmm.
But CU sets page lock unfairness to be latency sensitive rather than throughput sensitive. So that increases the stability of the CPU and frames and everything by quite a bit.
All right. Well, that I mean, it's like I said, fantastic tool, and it is definitely necessary on every Steam Deck. And you, with the UI you put in, it's quite easy to use. It helped for me, especially in the beginning, as I was like discovering what everything was, like being able to just put, just have your recommended settings just automatically applied. Um, are there any plans to make it more compatible with, let's say, game mode? Because I've actually, like, the way I use it is, I have it added onto Steam as like a non-Steam game, and I can change it from game mode, and it's fine, like it works. But do you have any desire or plans to like make it more compatible to be easier to use without having to go to desktop mode?
Yeah. So actually, just last month, I had it officially added to Steam Grid DB, so you can actually add art to it in game mode now. And the new version I'm working on does have better scaling, so it looks much better in game mode and properly scales to the screen. The current iteration is it gets a little blurry. Like you said, it's completely
Oh
usable.
yeah,
There's no
very.
problem with it. But the new version will not have the same blurriness issue. It's already perfectly scaled for game mode, and I've been exclusively using it in game mode just to make sure it would be okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, then that segues into my next question. CryoUtilities 2.4.
yeah.
Now,
So
what's coming up?
so I've been working on it for a few months now, actually, but life,
Yeah.
but I mean, it's already mostly done. I'll say that.
Hmm.
And it there will be a beta for Patreon probably soon. But it already has a few fixes for some known bugs that are on the issue board. It's
Hmm.
a complete refactor of the code. The entire thing has been gutted and reorganized and everything. Make it much more maintainable, less buggy, and easier to expand upon, which is the big thing,
Hmm.
because that's what I'm looking forward to doing the most. The installer script is improved, which will hopefully head off a few of the issues that people are having during the install. Currently, it's
Hmm.
hosted on GitHub Artifacts, and that's great unless the local GitHub mirror is down or doesn't have the artifact yet, and then it just outright fails, and there's nothing I can do about that. So I'm trying to compensate for that a little bit. And there is one big feature that will be coming to 2.4, which is something that's been asked about since I did the data um, syncing tool, which is a data
Hmm.
recall tool, which will take all the shader caches and prefixes off of any attached devices and move them back to internal memory, just in a single one click. That should help in the case where you're upgrading your micro SD or something like that. And it will also allow you to just, like I said, keep everything on the SSD, which is the fastest storage you have in the system. That
Hmm.
feature is mostly done. It does have a couple bugs that I'm still working through. But once all those are addressed, then yeah, CU 2.4 is shaping up to be pretty big.
Well, that's fantastic to hear. Now, you and I talk all the time because I'm your best friend, and you know, don't laugh at that. And We've talked about CryoUtilities 3.0 a little bit. I know you've got some plans for it
Yep.
already. Is there anything you can tease or tell us a little bit about for, like, I assume will be one of the biggest updates to the tools?
Yeah, it'll be the biggest update since CU2 came out, which
Hmm.
was in February of 2023.
Hmm.
I have I can tease three things that I think are going to be in there. Let's
Hmm.
see. So first is disable or re-enable file indexing in KDE,
Hmm.
which is a little bit arcane for most people, but essentially it'll save on a lot of disk writes. It'll make your SSD last a lot longer, and
Okay.
probably your micro SDs as well. There's a lot
Hmm.
of unnecessary disk writes going on, and this will prevent that from just slowly destroying your SSD.
Hmm.
The next one will be this is actually partially implemented already, but checking to see if CU is being run on a Steam Deck or not is a big thing, because right now there are a lot of features that are only working on the Steam Deck, and I just have to tell
Hmm.
people to avoid them if they're running on another Linux system. This will have it be intelligent and hide things that are not applicable on your system at runtime.
Hmm.
And then the third thing would be in advanced mode, because right now only swappiness and swap file resize allow you to set something to an arbitrary value. The advanced
Hmm.
mode will allow you to tune anything to any parameter you want. And that will help the tinkerers out there really hone in for what their use case is, what they want to do. Yeah, PLU, page lock and fairness right now is either 3 or it's 1. You could change it between 1 and 5 with
Hmm.
the advanced mode. So that's something that I think a lot of people, a lot of the tinkerers out there are looking forward to. Even if you're tinkering, setting up command like kernel parameters is still annoying, even if you're a dedicated Linux user. So having that just be in the UI would be make it much simpler. And then other than that, I think I want to say it's 13 other improvements that I'm looking to make, or at least
Hmm.
test out. And a lot of those are performance oriented too. But I'm focusing on 2.4 first, and then we'll see where we go from there.
That's awesome. Well, again, I know I don't think you brought it up, but I know that you crossed the CryoUtilities crossed the million download mark. So
Yeah,
congratulations to that.
thank you. Yeah, it just
Congratulations.
happened last month, a few days before my
Hmm.
birthday, actually, and that was huge. I was not expecting it at all. Just the most recent artifacts are at 300,000 downloads, so there are a lot of
Hmm.
downloads going on in the last 3 months, and yeah, no, I'm hugely happy with how much it's helped the community. I like obviously I'm happy to help, but I'm happy that other people are getting a better experience, and that's
Hmm.
what counts the most for me. So that million people out there, I hope you're having a good time with it.
I think they are. I'd be surprised if they weren't. But again, you made an incredible tool, and
Thank
it
you.
just goes to show. So congratulations, and thank you for you know giving us a little bit more insight into CryoUtilities, how it started, and where it's going to be heading next with the most, the next incoming update 2.4, and then the will 3.0 be the update after 2.4, or do you think there might be some little 2.4.1, something along those
There might be
lines?
some bug fixes depending on what the community finds, but
Mhm.
2.4 is planned to be the last major revision before 3.0.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Well, thank you for answering those questions and giving us a little bit more insight into everything.
yeah, no, thank you for asking them. And just so everybody knows, this is not going to be the CryoUtilities show. It's going to be a footnote.
Yeah, I mean it was one of the big things that I wanted to discuss here, but Kyle is here as himself. He is a host of this podcast, not just for this episode, but he is a mainstay of this podcast, along with one other host that I'm sure you'll be meeting very soon. But he is a staple for the podcast just as himself, not just for this episode for CryoUtilities. So thank you for answering those questions, though. But
No
you know,
problem.
he's here to stay for way more than that.
Damn right.
Either way, that's going to be it for this episode. Thank you guys for listening or watching if you are on YouTube. We're going to have links in the description below for all of the websites and articles and um, videos that we mentioned. So, like, if you want to watch the big video that Kyle made about CryoUtilities 2, just go ahead and check the description. And yeah, thank you guys for listening to our first episode. You know, this was
Thank you so much.
I've never really done like this kind of thing before, so it was definitely an interesting experience, even though I started out extremely nervous.
It's okay. I think we did fine.
Yeah,
It's been
yeah,
a great time here. Yeah, like I enjoyed talking about everything, and I can't wait for the next episode.
yeah. No, I'm already looking forward to it. Thank you guys again for watching, and we will see you guys next week.
All right. Bye.